At Gilbert's 28th birthday party, someone sent a woman to him right in front of me. I abandoned my usual gentle demeanor, smashed my wine glass, and wrecked the party. I packed my things and left alone. Everyone said I was helpless and would crawl back after 3 days, embarrassed and defeated. Gilbert didn't care at all, a lonely orphan, where else can she go after leaving me? But as countless days passed, with some even wondering if I had died outside, Gilbert finally called me for the first time. Only to find that my number was no longer in service. Later, at a famous artist's exhibition, a portrait of a profile made Gilbert lose his composure. He offered an astronomical price to buy the painting. I've smiled apologetically. This is the portrait I'm most satisfied with, painted for my wife. I can't sell it. Gilbert's 28th birthday party. I wore the most exquisite and beautiful dress, linking arms with Gilbert as we entered. As soon as we descended the stairs, Gilbert let go of my hand, leaving me standing there. Everyone's gaze followed Gilbert. And I was forgotten in the corner. People began presenting gifts to Gilbert. He casually gestured for the butler to take them. Until someone handed him a beautiful woman. And all eyes turned back to me. Some with sympathy, some waiting for the show, others with mockery. Over the years, I had seen too many of these ill-intentioned looks. Gilbert's face, which had been emotionless, showed a moment of distraction. The woman was strikingly similar to his deceased first love. To send a woman in front of my wife, you all really have guts. Gilbert smiled mockingly. The gift giver tried to flatter, she's gentle and gracious. I'm sure she won't mind. It's not that I didn't mind, they just calculated that I wouldn't dare to. An orphan raised by Gilbert's family. How could I possibly say no to the family's new head? Gilbert twirled his wedding ring on his finger, the smile in his eyes deepening. Since you've agreed, send her to my room. Before he finished, I had already stepped over to him. Looking at the woman's appearance. The gift giver had really thought it through, knowing what Gilbert liked. Suddenly, I felt exhausted. I seemed unable to continue pretending to be Gilbert's wife and maintaining my dignity, like my grandmother had told me. I gently pushed the champagne tower behind me. The delicate crystal tower collapsed with a loud crash. Glass and wine flew everywhere, and the party was thrown into chaos. Someone gasped, "She's lost her mind." I ruined Gilbert's birthday party. But he didn't really care. The butler had already arranged for the guests to leave, and servants began cleaning up the mess. The woman was left behind, quietly standing beside Gilbert. Even her personality seemed to mirror his first love's. Compared to her, I really did look like I was losing it. Gilbert played with the woman's hand, speaking indifferently as he glanced at me. "Why are you so angry? If you don't want to see her, I'll have her stay outside." "Don't worry, I swore to your grandmother that I'll never divorce you." The woman next to him also tried to persuade me. Why get upset? Someone like Gilbert, with his status and position, can't possibly have only one woman. I admire him, but I won't interfere with your position. I took off my ring. And placed it on the table in front of Gilbert. He raised an eyebrow. "You want the ring back?" Gilbert picked up the ring and tossed it into the air. The diamond's brilliant light flashed as it fell back into his hand. He threw it back, tossing it to the woman behind him. "Here, take it. My wife says she doesn't want a ring worth millions." Gilbert stood up with a cold laugh, instructing the butler. "Find a few teachers to teach her some manners. I don't want to see such impolite behavior again." He took a few steps, then turned back. He threw his own ring onto the floor. The ring rolled across the ground and stopped at my feet. "Since you don't want the ring, then throw it all away." Gilbert left with his entourage. The sound of the car engine leaving was especially loud in the quiet night. The butler sighed beside me. "Madam, why provoke Mr. Gilbert like this? You know he's upset with you." I picked up the ring at my feet and tossed it into the trash. "You can go. I don't need any help." The butler sighed again and left. I went upstairs alone, changed out of my elaborate dress, and put on a simple white t-shirt. I pulled out my suitcase and packed all my clothes from the wardrobe that belonged to me. When others have marital problems, they still have to worry about divorce agreements. But with Gilbert and me, our connection was so thin that the only thing left was our wedding rings. No one could have imagined that our wedding, which had once shocked the entire city, was a marriage without even a marriage certificate. I still remember what Gilbert said during our wedding. "Only Adora's name belongs in the partner slot. You shouldn't have married me, Enid." But what could I do? I still married him, the man I had loved for 7 years as a teenager, hoping one day I could win his heart. But in the end, I became the wife of Gilbert in everyone's eyes, a title with no real meaning. As I dragged my suitcase out of the villa, the entire place was eerily quiet. It felt just like the night my grandmother first brought me back. 13-year-old Gilbert stood on the stairs, looking coldly at me. Then turned and went to the kitchen. He came back with a glass of warm milk. I booked a flight ticket. 6 hours in the air, then 3 more hours by car, and I arrived in a small, remote southern town. They say when people get old, they yearn to return to their roots. But for someone without a home, they long for their hometown even more. Even if that hometown no longer has any family. I rented a small courtyard in the town. The dialect sounded both familiar and strange, as I was still young when I left, and had been living in the northern city ever since. I had long forgotten how to speak it properly. Thankfully, the neighbor was also an outsider, though he arrived before me. One day, when I was buying groceries and couldn't understand the local dialect, he helped me out. The next day, I made cornbread to thank him for his help. Only then did I learn that he was an artist traveling for inspiration. He looked like he had just graduated from university, full of youthful energy. Away from the people and things of the northern city. I suddenly realized I was only 25. But after being around Gilbert for so long, always putting on airs, I had begun to feel like I was already past my prime. I bought some flowers from the street and planted them in my little courtyard, filling it with moonflowers. I placed a small rocking chair by the flower beds. It was simple, but everything was just the way I liked it. Gilbert's house had a garden full of yellow roses. And a glass conservatory where an expensive piano sat. That piano was designed specifically for Adora, and no one was allowed to touch it. When my grandmother wanted to pull out those roses, it made Gilbert furious. "If these roses disappeared, I won't come back to this house." No one ever mentioned it again, and both Adora and the roses became taboo in the family. In the afternoon, the door to the little yard was knocked on. Ives, wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack, smiled brightly when he saw me open the door. "I'm planning to hike up the mountain to paint the sunrise tomorrow morning. Want to go for a walk and clear your mind?" He gestured toward the mountain behind us. I knew that mountain was quite famous. Most tourists who come to the town usually do so for that mountain. I felt a little tempted. "Don't worry, I camp all the time. I'm really experienced and it's totally safe." Encouraged by his enthusiasm, I nodded. Ives really did seem to know what he was doing. He immediately went back to grab another bag, carrying both sets of camping gear all by himself, with his painting tools in hand. I offered to help carry something, but he firmly refused. "I'm strong, carrying this stuff is nothing." On the way up the mountain, we talked about the past and the future. My past seemed pretty dull. It was mostly about Gilbert and his family. In the end, I became the so-called wife of the CEO, with nothing much to show for it. Ives, on the other hand, always had fresh stories to tell and dreams for the future that never seemed to run out. Life is all about experience. My dream right now is to become a famous artist, so I have to give it my all. He paused, then leaned in and whispered, "I actually ran away from home. If one day you notice the house next door is empty, it might be because my family caught me and dragged me back." I looked at him and smiled. I never expected that we both shared the feeling of escape. But he still had a family who would chase him back, while Gilbert, well, if I disappeared, he might actually celebrate. When we reached the top of the mountain, it was just in time for the sunset. The warm golden light bathed us, creating a surreal, almost magical beauty. I looked down at the town below, all bathed in golden light, quiet and peaceful. Ives was already busy setting up the tent. I asked him, "The sunset is beautiful too, aren't you going to paint it?" "I prefer the sunrise. Every new day is a fresh start, full of endless possibilities and vitality." I sat on the stool Ives had set up and watched him work, my mind replaying his words, "a new start." Leaving Gilbert was the bravest decision I've made in all these years. But I felt like a coward, a weak fugitive. I came back to a remote town and hid myself in this little yard. I had never thought about what to do next. Was I really going to waste my life here? I'm only 25, and there are endless possibilities ahead. I've finished setting up the tent and pulled out food and water for me. He casually lay down next to me on the mat, hands behind his head, gazing up at the starry sky. Do you want to try lying down to watch the stars? It's a different experience. In my family, I was always expected to follow etiquette, and everything I did had to align with the identity of Gilbert's wife. The most common phrase I heard was, "Madam, you can't do that." Lying down to watch the stars was something I never even considered before. But now, Ives didn't give me time to think. He reached out, pulled me, and I was suddenly lying next to him on the mat. Lie down quickly. I stopped being so reserved and followed his lead. Once lying down, the stars seemed so close, as if I could reach out and touch them. Ives and I lay there, watching the vast sky and talking about the world. And in my heart, I made a decision. I had to be brave enough to step out. Running away wasn't the answer. I should meet new people, experience the vast world outside, until, even if he was standing right in front of me, Gilbert would no longer matter. I fell into a deep sleep later that night. Though I was in a simple tent, I felt more at peace than I had in a long time. The next morning, I stumbled out of the tent, and Ives had already set up his easel, his face now serious and focused. The morning sun slowly rose, gently brushing against every inch of my skin. I gazed at the place where the sun rose, and realized that this, too, was my new beginning. Don't move. Ives suddenly called out excitedly, and I froze, only able to catch a glimpse of him from the corner of my eye. Clearly, he was using me as his model. Once he finished, I stretched my neck, feeling sore. Turns out, being a model wasn't easy. I'll give you a massage, to thank you for being my model. Ives' hands came to my neck, his grip firm. I relaxed, squinting in pleasure as I enjoyed the massage. On the way down the mountain, Ives kept talking about his recent inspiration. I glanced at the painting he'd made, thinking it looked nice, though I couldn't really understand more than that. When we got back, Ives disappeared into his own yard. I turned on the TV, and suddenly, Gilbert's face appeared on the screen, making me jump back in shock. I had planned to change the channel, but my hand froze. I was glad about the decision I made last night. Gilbert appeared on TV often, and I couldn't keep avoiding him. In the news interview, Gilbert seemed unchanged. When asked about the rumors of our marriage falling apart, he just gave a cold expression. Enid threw a tantrum. She'll be back after a little break. Everyone envied me, a helpless orphan who had been raised by Gilbert's grandmother, and in the end, married Gilbert. They thought I must have been blessed in my past life. But only those involved knew how it felt, to be ignored by everyone, to be resented by Gilbert, to carry the title of wife yet still feel like a rootless weed in the family. Every year, when yellow roses bloomed, Gilbert would have the servants cut the flowers from the yard and fill the house with them. The piano in the glass conservatory was always wiped down by the servants. Adora was dead, but Gilbert made sure I was constantly reminded of her presence. I heard you and Enid had a fight because of the assistant you've been keeping around lately? Gilbert frowned impatiently, instinctively reaching for his wedding ring. But there was nothing there. Then he remembered that Enid had been bold enough to return the ring and run away. He recalled the butler's call that day, frantically saying his wife was missing. He returned home to find Enid's half of the wardrobe emptied out, leaving only his suits hanging in an otherwise empty closet. It was just another move to force him to get rid of the woman who resembled Adora. But so what? His grandmother was gone, and Enid had no family left, her only reliance was him. As a child, she would hide away whenever she felt wronged. Back then, her grandmother always pampered her. He didn't have the patience to chase after her now. Once she had experienced enough hardship out there, she'd realize how good the Liu family was, and eventually come back. So he told the butler, a helpless orphan, where else would she go after leaving me? Don't let anyone go looking for her. Let me know when she comes back. After Gilbert initially became impatient, the host quickly shifted the topic from emotions to business. When they started talking about work, Gilbert's expression relaxed a lot. It seems that Enid is the kind of person who makes him frown just at the mention of her. I poured myself a glass of ice water, took out my laptop, and started working on my resume. The town is mostly populated by elderly people. It's perfect for retirement, but there aren't many job opportunities. If you want to work, you have to leave. I wrote until evening before stretching and getting up to prepare dinner. A simple 3 dishes and a soup. As I sat at the table, I suddenly wondered if Ives next door was still busy. When he paints, does he, like Gilbert at work, often forget to eat? When Grandma was still around, Gilbert had stomachaches several times because he didn't eat on time. Afterward, whenever I had the chance, I'd bring him food at the office. At first, his secretary would stop me outside his office, and I'd have to wait for an hour or two. But later, he seemed to get used to it, and he'd let me in to interrupt his work. He'd eat, then continue working. I sighed, put on my jacket, and knocked on the gate of the yard next door. I didn't hear anything from inside, so I was about to leave when the gate suddenly opened. Seeing me at the door, Ives' impatient expression blossomed into a smile. "I'm actually painting you. Didn't expect you to show up right as I opened the door." Ives was holding a paintbrush, with splashes of paint on his clothes, and even on his face, looking a bit messy. But his smile was so bright, the paint stains only added a bit of charm, making him look more lively. "You haven't eaten yet, have you? Want to come over to my place for dinner?" Hearing my invitation, Ives, still clutching his stomach, let out a delayed groan. "I'm so hungry." "You really care about me, huh?" "I'll go put the brush down." For the next few days, it seemed like I had come to some sort of silent agreement with Ives. He came over for dinner every day, and when he left, he'd help me clean up. He also took care of the gardening work in the yard. It's a shame I don't have a brother. If I did, having someone like him would be great. I sent out several resumes and got some interview invitations. On the day I decided to leave, I prepared to say goodbye to Ives early in the morning. When I opened the door, I saw several black sedans parked in front of his yard. There were also a few men in suits standing by the cars, looking like bodyguards. I hesitated for a few minutes before stepping forward. When I approached, a bodyguard reached out, seemingly trying to block me. "Don't touch her." Ives walked out from the yard, his usual sunny smile replaced by a more serious, colder expression. He grabbed my hand and led me into the yard. The gate slammed shut behind us. "Don't follow us." The bodyguards exchanged glances before reluctantly saying, "Okay. Are you here to ask me to dinner?" Without the bodyguards around, Ives seemed to return to his cheerful self. "No, I'm here to say goodbye." Ives' voice suddenly raised a few decibels. "Where are you going?" I told him about the resumes I had sent out and the interview I had gotten. "Even though this place is great, you once said on the mountain that every day is a new beginning, with endless possibilities and vitality. I also want to give myself a fresh start, to live with no regrets." "So, have you let go of the person in your heart?" I was a little surprised and looked at him. Ives blinked. "Don't treat me like a little boy." A painter's eyes are sharp. The way he said that made me feel a little embarrassed. "I guess I have let go." "So, where are you going to work?" "North City." Although I had considered moving to a city farther away from Gilbert, I had been living in North City ever since Grandma took me in. I grew up there, went to school, and all my friends are there. Why should I force myself to move to a new, unfamiliar city just to distance myself from Gilbert, only to gradually adapt to a new life there? "Then I'll go with you. My family has already found me." I never expected to end up hitching a ride with Ives. Heading back to North City, the nerves I had about facing Gilbert again slowly faded amidst Ives' endless chatter about his plans. Life back in North City seemed to be going smoothly. The interview went well, and I received a job offer to start next week. I rented a place near the company. But after Ives disappeared for 2 days, he reappeared as my neighbor. When I went out to throw away the trash, I saw workers moving furniture in and out next door. Glancing over, I saw the young, handsome Ives standing inside, directing the workers on where to place the furniture. "What are you doing here?" "I was going to surprise you, but I guess you found me out." Ives naturally bent down to take the trash bag from my hand. "I missed your cooking, so I decided to become your neighbor again and keep mooching off your food." His unexpected presence did bring a bit of surprise. Living in an unfamiliar place, having him as a neighbor made me feel safer. "Well then, I'll make a few dishes to celebrate your move." In the end, we decided to have hot pot at home for convenience. The red broth was boiling, and I've scooped a freshly cooked piece of beef tripe into my bowl. As soon as I took a bite, the spiciness hit me, and I couldn't help but gulp down several sips of the drink beside me. So you can't eat spicy food, huh? I heard you say you love hot pot, so I thought. It's fine. I probably haven't eaten it in a while, so I'm just not used to it. How long had it been since I last had hot pot? I couldn't even remember. It used to be my favorite. When Grandma was around, she'd eat the clear soup while I'd go for the spicy one. One time, when Gilbert was working late, the food I brought had already gotten cold. It happened to be snowing outside, so I suggested we go out to eat. I took him to a hot pot place. Gilbert always preferred mild food, so I ordered 2 different broths. But throughout the meal, he kept frowning. On the drive home, he said, "Don't make me eat this again. It leaves a strong smell on your body." After that, I never ate spicy hot pot again. When you haven't had something for a long time, even your taste buds can't adjust. But fortunately, I quickly worked up a sweat, and I found the joy of hot pot once again. After dinner, I've cleaned the table, tidied up the kitchen, and opened the windows to let the room air out. When he left, he took the trash bag with him. Returning to Beijing was much quieter than I had expected. The media didn't mention the long-absent Mrs. President, nor did anyone come looking for me. My existence had never been worth noticing. Instead, the media seemed far more interested in the female assistant who was always by Gilbert's side. I casually scrolled through the paparazzi photos. How ironic. Did Gilbert truly love Adora that much? In the photos, Gilbert bent down slightly, letting the woman straighten his tie. When getting into the car, he carefully shielded her head. On a rainy day, she held up an umbrella high above them, but when he took it from her, he tilted it entirely in her direction. So, love could be so easily transferred, just because of a similar face. Gilbert had always done a good job protecting Adora's information. No photos of her had ever been leaked. Everyone was speculating whether I had been completely cast aside by Gilbert. If I had never left, I would probably still be waiting for a husband who never came home. But now, I was busy organizing proposals, attending meetings. Busy. Ives. I told you to stop acting spoiled with me all the time. I pushed away the head resting on my shoulder. Ives, however, reached out and slid my laptop farther away, complaining. A handsome guy is right in front of you, and you're zoning out over some old man? It was the first time I'd heard someone call Gilbert an old man. If Gilbert ever found out, imagining his expression alone was enough to make me laugh. When I finally stopped laughing and looked up, Ives' expression had turned serious. He's the one who hurt you, isn't he? Gilbert, I know him. I gave him a surprised look. In my memory, I had never seen Ives at the Liu family's estate. When I was a kid, my mom told me to call him uncle. I couldn't hold it in, I clutched my stomach and collapsed onto the couch, laughing uncontrollably. Ha ha ha. He's only 4 years older than you, and you actually called him uncle? Ha ha ha. Ives pinched my cheek. He looks old. Gilbert had been involved in the family business from a young age. He had always seemed more mature than his peers. Thinking about it that way, Ives wasn't entirely wrong. So, you're the missing Mrs. President? Ives' face suddenly came close. That was when I realized that, amid my laughter, I had somehow ended up resting on his lap. I tried to push myself up, but for once, he wasn't as easygoing as usual. His eyes locked onto mine, as if waiting for an answer. I nodded. Then, am I your secret lover, hidden away from the world? Ives burst out laughing at his own words. I smacked him lightly. Don't talk nonsense. Besides, I've already left him and his family. I even gave back the ring. Great, then I'll get a lawyer. You two can finalize the divorce tomorrow. There's no need. We don't have a marriage certificate. I gave a bitter smile. No marriage certificate, so there was no divorce to be had. The only tie between us had been that wedding ring, the symbol of marriage. I had been Mrs. President for so long that even Gilbert had probably forgotten we never actually registered our marriage. Well, that makes it easier. Why don't you get one with me instead? Staring at the freshly printed marriage certificate in my hand, I felt momentarily dazed. I had once thought that the name beside mine on a marriage certificate would be Gilbert's. I had never imagined the groom would be someone else. Last night, after relentless pestering from Ives, I agreed to a fake marriage, just to keep his family from pressuring him. Ives took the certificate from my hands. I'll take this home and show my family first, or else my mom will still think I'm lying. This marriage felt completely unreal. 3 years ago, I had a grand wedding, one with ceremony, but no certificate. Everything had been for show, a performance of happiness for outsiders to see. Now, I had a certificate but no wedding. And yet, I felt strangely at peace. Maybe because I had no expectations, there was nothing to be disappointed about. Ives returned from his family visit with good news. My parents have finally agreed to let me hold an art exhibition. This collection is my best work yet. A month later, Ives' exhibition was a success. I had to work late that day, and by the time I got off, it was nearly 8 p.m. As I arrived at the venue, I caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette in the crowd outside, someone who looked a lot like Gilbert. I shook my head. It was probably just someone with a similar build. Inside the gallery, many of the paintings felt familiar. A few excited girls rushed past me, holding art books. Hurry, Ives is right up ahead. This time, I have to get his autograph. I heard this is his last exhibition. If we miss it, we'll never get another chance. Following their gaze, I saw Ives, tall, standing out in the crowd. He was bowing his head, patiently signing autographs. His last exhibition? Wasn't this his first? I scanned the room and found the artist's biography near the entrance. Turns out, Ives was already a well-known painter. His works had been on a national tour, and some had even sold for sky-high prices. I suddenly hesitated to approach. The Ives described in that bio didn't seem like the playful boy I knew, the one who always acted spoiled around me. Quietly, I turned to leave. As I stepped outside, I saw Gilbert standing on the roadside, frowning as he made a phone call. So I hadn't been mistaken earlier. Gilbert called the number again and again, one he had never proactively dialed before. He already knew what he would hear, the cold, mechanical voice telling him that Enid's number was no longer in service. But aside from that string of digits, he had no idea who to contact to find her. The moment he saw that painting in the gallery, something in his chest had tightened. The woman in the painting looked just like Enid, but also, not quite. Her eyes shone brighter than the morning sun, radiating life. So dazzling, they were almost blinding. That wasn't Enid. She had always been like a stagnant pool of water, utterly still. She barely had a temper, let alone the courage to argue. Even when bullied, she would just hide and cry alone. He had once seen her sobbing quietly in the greenhouse. When she heard his footsteps, she fled like a frightened kitten, retreating into her room. Back then, he had hated that about her, the way she never carried herself with dignity. She had been Mrs. President in name, yet only dared to put on a front in public. At home, she reverted to her timid self. He wanted to buy that painting and hang it in her room, let her see it every day, let it influence her. But Ives had told him. This is the portrait I'm most satisfied with, of my wife. Sorry, it's not for sale. At those words, Gilbert inexplicably felt relieved. So, the woman in the painting wasn't Enid after all. And yet, as soon as he stepped out of the exhibition, an unbearable urgency rose within him. She had been angry for long enough. It was time for her to come home. Hearing the mechanical voice again, he finally lost his patience and turned to his bodyguard. Find Enid. The moment you do, bring her back to me. When the bodyguard knocked on the door, Ives was setting the table in the dining room. As soon as the door opened, several bodyguards rushed in but were stopped by him. Who are you looking for? The bodyguard's gaze settled on me, holding a spatula. Miss Enid, Mr. Gilbert has sent us to bring you back. I hadn't heard that title in over half a year. For a moment, it felt like a lifetime ago. Stop calling me that. This is my wife. Ives pushed the bodyguards out of the way. They exchanged looks. One of them pulled out his phone and dialed Gilbert. Mr. Gilbert, Miss Enid seems to have gotten married. Gilbert arrived quicker than I had imagined. Within minutes, he was standing at the door, his face looking terrifyingly dark. The bodyguard stepped aside, and Gilbert tried to push past Ives. But he couldn't move him. Get him out of the way. Gilbert snapped at his bodyguards. You barged into my house, trying to take my wife. That doesn't seem very appropriate, does it, Mr. Gilbert? Gilbert finally looked directly at Ives. So the person in that painting is my wife? I believe I'm the one who deserves an explanation here. Explanation? We've already registered our marriage. She's my legal wife. Gilbert let out a cold laugh and looked over at me. You actually went behind my back and got married to someone else? Now you come back, and you want me to pretend nothing happened? He reached out his hand toward me. Every time he'd done that before, I would have taken his hand without hesitation. But this time I didn't move. I've returned the ring to you. We're even now. Gilbert. Even? My family raised you, and now you think a simple even is enough to cut ties? Enid, are you even speaking human words? Gilbert's eyes were bloodshot, and for a moment, he didn't notice that Ives had stepped in. He grabbed my hand tightly, and I could feel him almost breaking my wrist. You go divorce him right now. You just want to register with me, right? Once you've divorced him, we can get married. I slapped Gilbert across the face with my free hand. Everything went still. Gilbert seemed to take a while to process what had just happened. What the hell are you doing? I left the family, and I don't even care about that marriage certificate anymore. I'm gone now, and you can bring anyone you want back to your place. Can't we just let go of each other? You think I should let go of you? You're my family's responsibility. Even if you die, you'll die in my family. Gilbert suddenly picked me up, but just as he reached the door, Ives' bodyguard came out of the elevator and stopped him. You dare take her today? I'll sue you for kidnapping. You don't think I can't protect my wife, do you, Mr. Gilbert? I was a bit shaken. This situation was something I never could have imagined. I thought that once I left, Gilbert would feel relieved, maybe even happy. But now, with him acting like this, who was he trying to fool? It wasn't clear who started the fight, but the scene quickly descended into chaos. Ives and Gilbert ended up grappling with each other. Luckily, Ives won. But Gilbert had punched him on the left side of his face, and it looked pretty bad. You're getting older, fighting's not your thing. You should stop trying to act tough. I tugged on Ives' sleeve, worried that Gilbert might retaliate against him. Gilbert had never fought anyone in his life, and now he looked this miserable. A few of his bodyguards were also bruised. Help him back inside. Don't come looking for me again. I pulled Ives back into the house. He held his face, frowning. Baby, that was a nasty hit. Can you check if I've been disfigured? I grabbed the first aid kit. Don't call me that. Let me treat it. As I got closer, he suddenly turned and kissed me on the lips. This works way better than medicine. Earlier, when Gilbert was here, why did you just go along with me calling you my wife? I shoved some iodine in his hand. You told me before that we were just acting, that it wasn't a real marriage. I've smiled, clearly pleased with himself. I just wanted to make sure I had a legal claim on you before he tried to steal you away. You're tricking me into marriage. I'm using the family business to get my freedom. If that's a scam, then I've invested my whole life into it. If you divorce me, I'll lose my wife and still have to work for the family company my whole life. That's really tragic. I finally understood why he had said that the exhibition would be his last. I poked his injured cheek. Are you an idiot? Then don't leave me. At least I'll have a painful and happy life with you. I nodded, but Ives got a little greedy. Now, can I kiss you openly? Before I could answer, his kiss already landed. The situation spiraled out of control, and Ives seemed like a kid who had just gotten his hands on a treat. By the time I tried to push him away, I was already like a puddle of water in his arms. Ives, stop. Don't worry, I'll go easy. In my drowsy haze, I finally understood what he meant by his good stamina. Ives moved us into a new place. He said he was worried Gilbert would come back to harass us. The new place was quiet for a while, until Ives took me to pick out a wedding dress. I had no idea we were actually planning a wedding. I'd been preparing since the day we registered. When I painted that picture, I was already thinking about how I wanted you to be the most beautiful bride. Ives took care of every detail of the wedding. I was only occasionally pulled by his mom for my input. When we were picking the hotel, we ran into Gilbert in the courtyard garden. I had planned to avoid him, but he saw me first. "Enid, come back, please? I'll take care of you like Grandma said, for the rest of my life." "That's where you grew up. Don't you want me? Don't you want our home anymore?" I pulled my hand out of his. "I've been part of your family for years, and you've never treated me like family. Now I have a new family, and I just hope you won't bother me anymore." Ive's parents really liked me. Especially when they found out I had no other relatives since my parents passed away. Ive's mom hugged me and cried, saying that from now on, she would be my mom. I really liked the family Ives had given me. It was a real family, one where I could belong. Once, the only family I had was Gilbert's grandmother. After she passed away, there was nothing left to hold on to. I saw Ives coming out and waved as I ran toward him. He wrapped my coat around me and turned to talk to the hotel manager about some details. Gilbert stood still, his gaze following me as I left. But that figure never looked back. Extra, Gilbert's perspective. I've always prided myself on being able to read people in the business world after all these years. But I never imagined that I could never truly understand Enid, the person closest to me. I thought she was helpless and that I could easily control her. But after she went out once, she suddenly became much bolder. Back when Grandma insisted that we get married, I agreed verbally but only held a wedding ceremony for her sake. I purposely didn't register our marriage. She endured it without ever going to Grandma to complain. I deliberately placed Adora's favorite yellow roses in front of her and saw her face turn pale. That's when I realized what bothered her. So, when that woman who looked like Adora appeared before me, I agreed without hesitation. Sure enough, Enid's face turned a sickly shade of pale. But what I didn't expect was that she would get so angry and even throw our wedding rings away. I always thought of her as a runaway child, but I didn't realize that she had grown up long before I even noticed. I was no longer her only support. She had a job, new friends, and even got married. I was downstairs waiting for the bodyguard to bring her back when I heard the bodyguard say she had gotten married. I almost dropped my phone. She said she wanted to sever ties with me, as if she wanted to erase me from her life completely and become strangers. In a fit of anger, I struck out at that man. And to my surprise, I couldn't even win against him. I remember him being annoying when he was younger. He was only a few years younger than me, yet he had the nerve to call me uncle. Now that he's grown up, I despise him even more. But when Enid saw him injured, her eyes were full of concern. Maybe she didn't even realize it herself, but her eyes were only focused on him. When she looked at me, all I saw was caution. Suddenly, I felt like I had lost something that I might never get back. Their wedding invitation came to my hands, and the smiles on their faces in the photo were painfully bright. We once had a grand wedding too, but I was so indifferent that I couldn't even be bothered to take a picture with her. All the arrangements were left to the butler, and I just stood by, like I was merely a guest at my own wedding. She must have been disappointed by that wedding, right? All these years, I've gotten used to her being by my side, taking her presence for granted, always thinking she would stay forever. It wasn't until now that I realized, once you lose someone, they will never truly belong to you again. She didn't want this family anymore, and she left me behind, forever trapped here. The end.